The distress signal pierced through the cosmic void like a dying star's final scream, carrying with it the desperate pleas of an entire civilization teetering on the edge of extinction. It reached Earth's deep space monitoring stations as humanity was still nursing the wounds of its own brutal conflicts, still learning to look beyond their blue marble home toward the infinite darkness that had always called to them. The Zalathi had been broadcasting for 3 standard cycles, their elegant, mathematical poetry translated into raw, primal terror. Their world, Zephyria Prime, hung like a jewel in the Andromeda Arm, its crystalline cities reflecting the light of twin suns in breathtaking aurora displays. But beauty meant nothing when the Ravagers came. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the holographic display in the war room, buried deep beneath the Rockies, her weathered face illuminated by the pale blue glow of tactical readouts. The data streams painted a picture of systematic annihilation. The Ravagers moved from system to system like a plague of locusts, consuming not just resources, but entire species, leaving behind nothing but empty husks of worlds drained of all life. They're requesting immediate military assistance, reported Commander Torres, his voice tight with barely contained urgency. The Zalathi offer full technological exchange, access to their quantum fold networks, even territorial concessions. They're offering us everything, Admiral. Chen nodded grimly. The Zalathi were known throughout the local Galactic cluster as master engineers and peaceful traders. They're flowing, almost ethereal forms concealing brilliant minds that had created some of the most beautiful and efficient technology the galaxy had ever seen. They had no standing military, no concept of warfare beyond theoretical models. They were sheep crying for wolves to save them from other wolves. How long do they have? Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Intelligence suggests the Ravager fleet will reach Zephyria Prime within 6 standard days. Their previous attacks show a pattern. They strip mine the planet's core, harvest all biological material, then move on. Nothing survives, nothing ever survives. The silence in the room was deafening. Around the table sat humanity's finest military minds, men and women who had cut their teeth on the brutal urban warfare of the resource wars, who had learned to fight dirty in the asteroid belt conflicts, who had seen civilizations rise and fall on the edge of a knife. They were the products of a species that had clawed its way from the primordial soup, through ice ages, plagues, and nuclear fire. Sir, ventured General Morrison, his scarred hands clasped tightly before him, our long-range capability is still limited. We can maybe get a small strike force there, but logistics for a full campaign. He trailed off, leaving the impossibility unspoken. Chen turned to study the holographic representation of Zephyria Prime, its delicate spires and flowing architecture so alien yet somehow familiar. These weren't just coordinates on a star chart. They were homes, schools, nurseries where Zalathi young learned their first equations. They were art galleries filled with sculptures that sang in harmonious frequencies, libraries containing the collected wisdom of millennia. We won't be sending a full campaign, Chen said finally, her voice carrying the weight of command decisions that would echo through history. We'll send what we always send when the impossible needs to be done. We'll send our best. The room stirred with understanding. When Chen said our best, she didn't mean the largest force or the most advanced technology. She meant the men and women who had earned their reputations in the hell of close-quarters combat, who had learned that victory often came down to will rather than firepower, who could take impossible odds and somehow find a way to win. Within hours, the call went out across Earth's military networks. It wasn't a draft or a general mobilization. It was a quiet summons to those who had already proven themselves in the crucible of human conflict. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From the orbital stations came Captain Maria Voss, whose squad had held the line at Titan Station for 72 hours against overwhelming odds. From the Deep Space Patrol ships came Lieutenant Commander James Reaper Morrison, whose unconventional tactics had broken the siege of the Europa colonies. From the underground resistance networks came Sergeant First Class David Kim, whose knowledge of improvised warfare had kept the hope alive during the darkest days of the corporate wars. They came from every corner of human space, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of a species that had never known peace for long, that had learned to fight with everything from rocks and sticks to antimatter warheads. They were volunteers, every single one. But they came not for glory or treasure, they came because someone had asked for help. And in the deepest part of their DNA, humans had never been able to ignore that call. The ship that would carry them was the UES Defiance, a vessel that looked like it had been designed by a committee and built in a scrapyard. Where other species favored elegant curves and aesthetic beauty, humans had built something that looked like a flying brick bristling with weapons. It was ugly, practical, and absolutely lethal, much like the species that had created it. As the warriors assembled in the Defiance's cargo bay, they represented something the galaxy had never seen before. They weren't the products of a peaceful civilization forced into war. They were the evolutionary product of a world that had known nothing but conflict, where every technological advancement had been turned into a weapon, where survival had always depended on the ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome. The Zalafi had asked for help. They had no idea what they were about to receive. Major Elena Vasquez stood before the assembled force, her augmented left arm gleaming dully in the harsh cargo bay lighting. She had lost the original to shrapnel during the Martian independence war, and the replacement was military grade, capable of crushing steel and interfacing directly with weapons systems. Her eyes, still purely human, surveyed the faces before her with the calculating gaze of a predator. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying easily through the vast space. "We're going to a world that's never known war. We're going to fight an enemy that's never faced resistance. We're going to be outnumbered, outgunned, and operating at the end of a supply line that stretches across half the galaxy." The assembled warriors listened in perfect silence, their faces reflecting the same grim determination that had carried humanity through its darkest hours. "The Zalafi are counting on us to save them. They think we're coming to be their shields, their protectors, their salvation." Vasquez's smile was sharp as a blade. "They have no idea that we're not just coming to save them. We're coming to teach the galaxy a lesson it's never going to forget." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the group. "The Ravagers think they understand warfare. They think they understand destruction. They've never met humans before. They're about to learn the difference between conquest and annihilation." The Defiance's engines thrummed to life, a deep vibration that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone aboard. In the vast darkness of space, the ship turned toward the distant stars, carrying with it the concentrated fury of a species that had learned to fight in the void. Between worlds as the jump drive spooled up, preparing to tear a hole in spacetime itself, the warriors of Earth made their final preparations. They checked their weapons, reviewed their intelligence, and said their prayers to whatever gods watched over soldiers about to face the unknown. None of them knew that they were about to change the course of galactic history. None of them realized that their names would be spoken in whispers across 1,000 worlds, that their actions would become the stuff of legend and nightmare alike. They only knew that someone had asked for help, and they had answered. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth had always been considered too dangerous to contact. The Ravagers, for all their terrible power, were about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object forged in the crucible of human warfare. The Defiance disappeared into the cosmic void, leaving behind only the fading echo of its passage and the promise of violence to come. Behind them, Earth continued its ancient rotation, blissfully unaware that it had just sent its most dangerous children to paint the stars red with the blood of its enemies. War was coming to the galaxy, and for the first time in their long, brutal history, humans were bringing it to someone else. The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyria system, like a predator emerging from the shadows, its sensors immediately painting the tactical situation in stark, unforgiving detail. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The Ravager fleet hung in space like a mechanical cancer, their ships twisted amalgamations of harvested technology from a dozen conquered civilizations. Each vessel was unique, cobbled together from the remains of their victims, creating a horrific gallery of galactic suffering. The largest ship, easily the size of a small moon, pulsed with an organic rhythm that made even the hardened human warriors feel a primal revulsion. Jesus Christ, whispered Lieutenant Sarah Park, the ship's xenobiologist, as the sensor data streamed across her console. They're not just ships. They're alive. Major Vasquez studied the tactical display with the cold calculation of a chess master, examining a particularly complex endgame. The Ravager fleet numbered in the hundreds, each ship bristling with weapons that had been proven effective against dozens of different species. But there was something else, something that made her blood run cold. They're hurting them, she said quietly, her augmented fingers tracing the movement patterns on the holographic display. Look at the formation. They're not attacking Zephyria Prime directly. They're driving the civilian population into specific areas. Captain Rodriguez, the Defiance's commanding officer, leaned forward to study the display. For what purpose? Harvesting, came the response from Commander Torres, his voice tight with barely contained disgust. Intelligence was wrong. They don't just strip mine planets. They're farming the inhabitants. The Zalathi aren't just facing extinction, they're being prepared for processing. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Through the vast viewports, they could see the beautiful crystalline cities of Zephyria Prime, their surfaces now dark with the shadows of massive harvesting. Ships, streams of light, actually tractor beams, filled with Zalathi civilians, flowed upward toward the waiting maws of the Ravager vessels. Sir, reported the communications officer, his voice cracking slightly. We're receiving transmissions from the planet. The Zalathi leadership is. They're asking if we're their salvation. Vasquez's expression hardened. She had seen enough horror in her lifetime to know that sometimes salvation came with a price that was almost too high to pay. But she also knew that the alternative was always worse. Patch me through to the Zalathi High Council, she ordered. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the elegant form of High Counselor Alexthi, his crystalline features reflecting the emergency lighting of what appeared to be an underground bunker. His large, multifaceted eyes held a desperate hope that made Vasquez's heart clench with something she hadn't felt in years. Protectiveness. Human warriors, the Zalathi leader began, his voice carrying the musical quality of his species even through the universal translator. We had hoped, we had prayed to the cosmic harmonies that you would come. Our people are dying. Our children are being taken. Can you save us? Vasquez stared at the alien leader for a long moment, seeing not just another species, but a reflection of every civilian she had ever failed to protect, every innocent life lost to the machinery of war. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of promises made and kept in the darkest corners of human space. High Counselor, we came as fast as we could, but I need to be honest with you, we're not here to save you. The hope in Alexthi's eyes flickered, and Vasquez could see the crushing weight of despair beginning to settle over his features. She continued before he could respond. We're here to teach you to save yourselves, and we're here to make sure that what's happening to your people never happens to anyone else again. The alien leader's confusion was evident, but before he could ask for clarification, the tactical officer's voice cut through the bridge like a blade. Major, we've got movement from the Ravager fleet. 3 scout ships breaking formation heading our way. Vasquez turned to study the approaching vessels, her mind already calculating angles, velocities, and firing solutions. Each Ravager scout was easily twice the size of the Defiance, their hulls covered in the characteristic patchwork of harvested technologies. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never encountered effective resistance. They're hailing U.S., reported the communications officer. Put them through. The screen split, showing both the Zalathi leader and something that made several of the human crew members step back in instinctive revulsion. The Ravager commander was a writhing mass of organic and mechanical components, its form constantly shifting as different technologies integrated and separated from its core consciousness. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of grinding metal mixed with dying screams. Unknown vessel, it said, the words somehow carrying an undertone of mockery. You have entered a harvesting zone. Surrender your biological components for processing, or be destroyed. Vasquez studied the creature for a moment, her expression utterly calm. When she spoke, her voice carried no fear, no hesitation, only the cold certainty of a predator who had found prey. Ravager vessel, "This is Major Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Space Forces. You are hereby ordered to withdraw from this system and release all Zalathi civilians immediately." The Ravager commander's form shifted, what might have been laughter rippling through its biomechanical mass. "You amuse us. Small creature, your species is unknown to us, but we have harvested warriors before. Your courage will be noted before. Your essence is consumed. Is that a threat?" Vasquez asked, her tone conversational. "It is a certainty." Vasquez nodded slowly, then turned to her tactical officer. "Mr. Kim, please show our new friends why Earth ships are built like bricks." The Defiance's response was immediate and devastating. Every weapon system on the human ship fired simultaneously, creating a web of destruction that reached across space to embrace the lead Ravager scout. But these weren't the elegant energy weapons favored by most galactic civilizations. These were human weapons, designed by a species that had learned to fight with whatever was available. Kinetic penetrators, moving at significant fractions of light speed, punched through the Ravager's shields like they were made of paper. Nuclear warheads, crude but effective, detonated against the creature's hull in brilliant flashes of atomic fire. Plasma cannons, originally designed for asteroid mining, carved through armor plating with the efficiency of industrial tools repurposed for war. The Ravager scout ship didn't just die, it was obliterated. Its component parts scattered across space in an expanding cloud of debris that sparkled like malevolent stars. The remaining scouts hesitated, their commanders clearly recalculating their assessment of the newcomers. In that moment of uncertainty, Vasquez played her next card. "All stations, deploy the package." From the Defiance's cargo bay, a dozen small objects ejected into space, each one no larger than a human fist. They looked insignificant, almost laughably small compared to the massive Ravager vessels, but appearances, as the galaxy was about to learn, could be deceiving. The objects were humanity's latest innovation in warfare: autonomous hunter-killer drones, each one equipped with a miniaturized fusion plant and a single, overriding directive: find the enemy and destroy it by any means necessary. They were the technological descendants of the improvised explosive devices that had terrorized human conflicts for centuries, refined and perfected by a species that had never met a problem it couldn't solve with sufficient application of violence. The drones scattered across the system like seeds of destruction, their primitive AI systems analyzing the Ravager fleet with the cold efficiency of machines designed for a single purpose. They were too small to be effectively targeted by the massive weapon systems of the harvesting ships, too fast to be caught by the lumbering patrol craft, and too numerous to be stopped by conventional point defense. "What are those things?" asked High Counselor Alexei, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and horror. "Those," Vasquez replied, watching as the first drone found its target and detonated in a brilliant flash that took out a Ravager communications relay, "are a gift from humanity to the galaxy. We call them problem solvers." The Ravager fleet erupted into chaos as the drones went to work. Each explosion was small, insignificant compared to the massive ships they targeted, but they struck with surgical precision at critical systems: power conduits, sensor rays, weapons controllers. All the delicate components that kept the massive vessels functioning began to fail as the tiny bombs found their marks. But the real genius of the human strategy wasn't in the drones themselves, it was in what they represented. For the first time in their existence, the Ravagers were facing an enemy that didn't fight fair, that didn't follow the established rules of galactic warfare, that treated every engagement as a problem to be solved rather than a ritual to be performed. The largest Ravager ship, the one that pulsed with organic life, began to move toward the Defiance with ponderous inevitability. Its hull was scarred with the marks of 1,000 conquests, its weapons systems charged with the accumulated energy of harvested star systems. It was a weapon of mass destruction personified, a testament to the Ravager's mastery of warfare. "Major," called the tactical officer, his voice tight with tension, "that thing is charging what looks like a planet-killer weapon. If it fires, it won't get the chance," Vasquez replied, her augmented hand moving to the weapons console. "Mr. Park, what's the biological reading on that ship?" The xenobiologist's fingers flew over her instruments, her face pale with the implications of what she was seeing. It's not just alive, Major. It's a collective consciousness. The entire ship is one massive organism, and it's in agony. The weapons systems are literally part of its nervous system. Vasquez's smile was sharp as a blade. Then we're going to put it out of its misery. She turned to the communications console. Get me a direct link to that thing. The screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking into what could only be described as the face of suffering itself. The Ravager ship creature was a mass of twisted, organic, and mechanical components, its eyes hundreds of them reflecting the pain of countless, absorbed civilizations. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of dying worlds. You cannot stop us, small ones. We are eternal. We are inevitable. We have consumed galaxies. You're right, Vasquez said calmly. We can't stop you, but we can do something better. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the bridge. We can teach you to stop yourselves with that. She activated the Defiance's most secret weapon, not a bomb or a gun, but a signal, a complex pattern of electromagnetic radiation that carried within it something the Ravagers had never encountered before, the complete military history of humanity, compressed into a data stream that would be absorbed by any intelligence that attempted to analyze it. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Ravager ship creature's scream echoed across the system as its collective consciousness was suddenly flooded with the accumulated knowledge of human warfare. Every battle, every strategy, every innovation born from the desperate need to survive in a hostile universe poured into its alien mind like poison. But it wasn't just the knowledge that destroyed it, it was the realization of what that knowledge represented. The Ravagers had spent millennia perfecting the art of harvesting civilizations, but they had never faced a species that had perfected the art of war itself. They were conquerors, but humans were destroyers, and there was a fundamental difference between the two. The massive ship began to convulse, its organic components rejecting the mechanical ones. As its consciousness fragmented under the weight of human military doctrine, systems failed, weapons powered down, and the creature that had once been a symbol of inevitable doom began to tear itself apart from within. All Ravager vessels. Vasquez broadcast across the system, her voice carrying the authority of a species that had earned its place through blood and fire. You have 10 minutes to withdraw from this system. Any ship that remains will be destroyed. Any ship that returns will be hunted down and eliminated. This is not a threat, it is a promise. The response was immediate. The Ravager fleet, faced with an enemy that fought with a brutality they had never encountered, began to withdraw. But they weren't retreating, they were fleeing, their organic components overriding their mechanical ones, in a desperate attempt to escape the psychological trauma of encountering humanity's true nature. As the last Ravager vessel disappeared into hyperspace, High Counselor Alexei stared at the human warriors with something approaching religious awe. You saved us, but how? How did you defeat them so easily? Vasquez turned to face the alien leader, her expression softer now but still carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. We didn't defeat them, High Counselor. We showed them what they really were. The Ravagers thought they were the ultimate predators, but they were just bullies, and bullies have never known what to do when their victims fight back. She paused, considering her next words carefully. But this isn't over. They'll be back, and next time they'll be ready for us. That's why we're not here to save you, we're here to teach you to save yourselves. The twist that would reshape the galaxy had already begun. The Ravagers, in their flight from the human fleet, would carry with them the knowledge of humanity's existence and knowledge in the hands of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of assimilation. Was a weapon more dangerous than any bomb. The humans had won the first battle, but in doing so, they had announced their presence to a galaxy that was about to learn why Earth had always been considered too dangerous to contact. The Ravagers would return, but they would not come alone. They would bring with them allies, enemies, and observers, all drawn by the promise of technology that could turn the tide of any conflict. The galaxy was about to discover that salvation and damnation were sometimes the same thing, and that the warriors Earth had sent to protect the innocent would ultimately be the catalyst for the largest war in galactic history. But for now, In the quiet aftermath of victory, the humans began the process of teaching a peaceful species how to fight. It was a lesson that would change both teacher and student in ways that none of them could imagine. 3 months after the Ravager retreat, the crystalline cities of Zephyria Prime had been transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to their original inhabitants. Where once elegant spires had reached toward the sky in perfect harmony, now crude but effective fortifications scarred the landscape. The Zalathi had learned their first lesson in human warfare. Beauty was a luxury that could be afforded only after survival was secured. Major Vasquez stood in what had once been the Grand Assembly Hall, its musical architecture now serving as a command center bristling with human-designed communication equipment. Around her, Zalathi engineers worked alongside human technicians, their flowing forms moving with increasingly military precision. As they absorbed the hard lessons of defensive warfare, the perimeter sensors are reporting another anomaly, announced Sixmar, a young Zalathi who had volunteered for the newly formed Planetary Defense Corps. Her crystalline features had lost much of their natural luminescence over the past months, dimmed by the weight of constant vigilance. Sector 7, approximately 2 kilometers from the mining facility. Vasquez nodded, her augmented hand tracing the location on the tactical display. The anomalies had been increasing in frequency over the past week, subtle distortions in spacetime that suggested something was probing the system's defenses. The Ravagers hadn't returned, but something else was out there, watching, waiting. Send a patrol, she ordered. Mixed human Zalathi unit. I want them to see how far our students have progressed. The patrol that deployed from the fortified compound 30 minutes later would have been impossible to imagine before the humans' arrival. Zalathi soldiers moved with the fluid grace of their species, but their movements now carried the purposeful economy of trained warriors. They had learned to think like predators, to see their beautiful world through the eyes of those who would destroy it. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, the scarred veteran who had earned his reputation in the asteroid belt conflicts, led the patrol, with the easy competence of someone who had spent his life walking into danger. Behind him, Zarthex, a former Zalathi artist who had traded her crystalline harp for a plasma rifle, moved with the deadly silence that the humans had taught her was more valuable than any symphony. Contact, Morrison whispered into his comm unit as they approached the anomaly site. Visual confirmation of, what the hell is that? The answer came not from his human superiors, but from the Zalathi beside him. Zarthex's multifaceted eyes had evolved to perceive spectrums of light that humans couldn't even imagine, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Observers. She breathed, her voice carrying the harmonics of terror. They're syndicate observers. The revelation hit the patrol like a physical blow. The Galactic Syndicate was the closest thing the galaxy had to a unified government, a loose confederation of species that had maintained peace through careful balance and mutual assured destruction. They were the ones who had isolated Earth, who had declared humanity too dangerous for contact. They were the ones who had left the Zalathi to die, rather than risk awakening the sleeping giant of human aggression. And now they were here, studying the results of their greatest fear made manifest. Back in the command center, Vasquez received the report with the grim satisfaction of someone who had been expecting the other shoe to drop. She had known that their victory over the Ravagers would have consequences, but she had hoped for more time to prepare. How many? She asked. 12 ships, all different configurations. Looks like they've got representatives from at least 8 different species. They're maintaining position just outside the system's edge, but their sensors are definitely active. Vasquez turned to High Counselor Alexei, who had been observing the human training methods with a mixture of fascination and horror. The elegant alien leader had changed over the past months, his crystalline features now carrying the weight of command decisions that would have been unthinkable in the peaceful society he had once led. High Counselor, it's time to make a choice, Vasquez said quietly. The Syndicate has finally come to see what we've accomplished here. They're going to offer you membership, protection, all the things they should have offered before the Ravagers came. Alexei's multifaceted eyes reflected the tactical displays around them, but his voice carried the harmonics of sadness. And, in return, they will ask us to abandon what you have taught us, to To return to the peaceful ways that left us defenseless. That's exactly what they'll ask. Vasquez confirmed. The question is, what are you going to tell them? Before the Zalafi leader could answer, the communications console erupted with activity. The Syndicate fleet was broadcasting on all frequencies, their message carried by the mathematical harmonics that served as the galaxy's diplomatic language. To the inhabitants of Zephyria Prime, the transmission began, the voice carrying the artificial perfection of a universal translator. The Galactic Syndicate extends greetings and offers immediate membership and protection to the Zalafi people. We have observed your recent difficulties and wish to provide assistance in returning to the peaceful ways that have maintained galactic stability for millennia. The transmission paused, and when it resumed, there was a subtle change in tone that made every human in the command center tense with anticipation. We also wish to discuss the presence of the isolated species that has been detected in your system. The Galactic Syndicate has protocols for dealing with such anomalies, and we are prepared to resolve this situation with minimal disruption to galactic peace. Vasquez felt her blood run cold. The Syndicate wasn't just here to recruit the Zalafi, they were here to eliminate the human presence before it could spread. She had seen enough political maneuvering to recognize a veiled threat when she heard one. "Hi, Counselor," she said. "Urgently, you need to understand what they're really offering. Protection, yes, but at the cost of your independence. They'll station a peacekeeping force here, and within a generation, Zephyria Prime will be just another Syndicate world, your culture absorbed into their collective." Selex's response surprised everyone in the room. Instead of the musical harmonics of uncertainty that had characterized his speech during the early days of the crisis, his voice now carried the hard edge of command authority. "I understand perfectly, Major. The question is, do you understand what we're offering you?" Vasquez frowned. "I'm not sure I follow." The Zalafi leader moved to the tactical display, his crystalline fingers dancing across the controls with the precision of a conductor directing an orchestra. The display shifted, showing not just the Syndicate fleet, but the entire galactic arm, with trade routes, military positions, and political boundaries marked in flowing lines of light. "You taught us to think like warriors, Major, but you forgot that we were already accomplished strategists. We've been watching, learning, analyzing. The Syndicate maintains peace through balance, but that balance is fragile. It depends on no single species being powerful enough to challenge the collective." His fingers moved again, and the display zoomed in on a cluster of systems near the galactic core. The Ravagers were not an anomaly. They were a symptom. The Syndicate has been growing complacent. Their peacekeeping forces spread thin, their member species more concerned with comfort than security. The balance is breaking down. Vasquez began to understand where this was leading, and the implications made her feel something she hadn't experienced in years. Uncertainty about the outcome of a conflict. "You're proposing an alliance," she said slowly, "the Zalafi and humanity against the Syndicate, not against," Selexi corrected, with, "We're proposing to offer the Syndicate something they need more than they realize. A reminder of why their peace is worth preserving." The plan that unfolded over the next hour was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. The Zalafi would accept Syndicate membership, but on their own terms. They would retain their human-trained military forces, not as a threat to galactic peace, but as a guarantee of it. They would become the galaxy's enforcers, the ones who dealt with threats like the Ravagers before they could grow large enough to challenge the established order. And humanity would be their secret weapon. The Syndicate isolates dangerous species, Selexi explained, his voice carrying the harmonics of satisfaction. But they've never had to deal with a dangerous species that didn't want to conquer them. You came here to help, not to dominate. That changes everything. The response to the Syndicate came not from the human command center, but from the Zalafi High Council, transmitted in the formal mathematical poetry of diplomatic protocol. It was a masterpiece of political maneuvering, appearing to accept the Syndicate's offer while fundamentally altering the terms of engagement. "We welcome Syndicate membership," the message began, "and we are prepared to contribute to galactic peace in ways that honor both our traditional values and our recent educational experiences." The reaction from the Syndicate fleet was immediate and telling. The 12 ships moved into a defensive formation, their commanders clearly recognizing that they were dealing with a very different Sci-Fi leadership than the one that had existed. Before the Ravager crisis, they're requesting a face-to-face meeting, reported the communications officer. They want to send a diplomatic team to the surface. Vasquez smiled, but it was the predatory expression of a hunter who had just realized that her prey was walking into a trap. Tell them we'll be happy to receive them. Full diplomatic honors, of course. The delegation that arrived on Zephyria Prime 6 hours later represented the full spectrum of Syndicate membership. There were the crystalline Jektari, masters of energy manipulation, who had helped design the galaxy's power grid, the flowing Mersanti, whose biotechnology had revolutionized agriculture across 100 worlds, the mechanical Verthuk, who had built the automated systems that kept trade flowing between the stars. All of them had one thing in common: they had never seen anything like what the Sci-Fi had become under human tutelage. Ambassador Keffer, the Jektari who led the delegation, moved through the transformed capital city with the careful steps of someone walking through a minefield. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of the changes that had swept over Zephyria Prime. Sci-Fi children played games that involved tactical formations. Artists created sculptures that doubled as defensive barriers. Musicians composed symphonies that encoded military communications. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. High Counselor, Keffer said when they finally reached the command center, his crystalline form reflecting the harsh lights of the human-designed equipment. We must speak plainly. The Syndicate cannot allow this militarization to spread. The galaxy has known peace for thousands of years because species like the Sci-Fi provided a counterbalance to more aggressive civilizations. The S response was delivered in the harmonic frequencies that indicated absolute certainty. Ambassador, the galaxy has known peace because aggressive civilizations were isolated or contained. But containment only works if the containers are strong enough to hold their contents. The Ravagers proved that they were not. The Ravagers were an anomaly, Keffer insisted. A statistical outlier. That the Ravagers were a symptom, Selexthi interrupted, his voice carrying harmonics of authority that made every Syndicate representative in the room step back involuntarily. And the disease is spreading. How many other species have you isolated, Ambassador? How many other dangerous civilizations are out there, growing stronger while you maintain your comfortable peace? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. The Syndicate's policy of isolation had been their greatest strength, but it had also created a galaxy full of unknown threats. Earth was just one of hundreds of worlds that had been deemed too dangerous for contact. The others were still out there, still developing, still growing in power. What do you propose? Keffer asked finally, his voice carrying the crystalline harmonics of reluctant acceptance. Selexthi turned to Major Vasquez, who had been standing silently in the background, letting the Sci-Fi leader handle the diplomatic maneuvering. When she stepped forward, every Syndicate representative in the room tensed, their survival instincts finally recognizing the predator in their midst. We propose, Vasquez said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had spent her life making life and death decisions, that you stop treating symptoms and start addressing the disease. The galaxy needs protectors, not peacekeepers. It needs warriors who fight for something greater than conquest. She gestured to the tactical displays that showed the transformed Zephyria Prime. The Sci-Fi have learned to fight, but they haven't lost their compassion. They're still the same species that sent out calls for help instead of building weapons. The difference is that now they can defend what they believe in. The truest that would reshape the galaxy came not from the human warriors or the Syndicate diplomats, but from an unexpected source. As the negotiations reached their climax, a new signal appeared on the long-range sensors. It was weak, barely detectable, but its signature was unmistakable. It was a distress call, transmitted in the mathematical harmonics that had become the galaxy's universal language. But this call was different from the one the Sci-Fi had sent months earlier. This one came from the Ravagers themselves. They're being attacked, reported the communications officer, his voice tight with disbelief. The Ravagers are calling for help. The implications hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. If the Ravagers, the most feared predators in the galaxy, were calling for help, then something far worse was coming. Something that made the choice between peace and war seem suddenly irrelevant. "Well," Vasquez said into the stunned silence, her voice carrying the dark humor of someone who had spent her life dealing with impossible situations. "Looks like we're all going to get a chance to see how well our teaching methods work." The galaxy was about to learn that the humans hadn't just come to fight the Ravagers. They had come to prepare for something far worse. And the warriors Earth had sent to protect the innocent were about to become the galaxy's last hope. Against an enemy that even the Ravagers feared. The real war was just beginning. The Ravager distress signal had been broadcasting for 72 hours. When the first refugee ships began arriving at the edge of the Zephyria system, they came in broken formations, their hulls scarred by weapons that left wounds unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. These weren't the proud harvesting vessels that had terrorized countless worlds. These were the shattered remnants of a fleet in full retreat, carrying with them the stench of absolute defeat. Major Vasquez stood in the command center, watching the tactical display with the focused intensity of a predator, studying wounded prey. The Ravager ships hung in space like dying beasts, their organic components visibly deteriorating as whatever had attacked them continued to consume their technology from within. "They're requesting permission to dock," reported Commander Torres, his voice carrying the disbelief of someone who had never expected to see the galaxy's apex predators reduced to begging for sanctuary. "They say they have information about what's coming." "What's coming?" Ambassador Keffer asked, his crystalline form flickering with the nervous energy of a diplomat who had suddenly realized that his carefully maintained balance of power was about to collapse. What could possibly be worse than the Ravagers? The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Maria Voss, the orbital station veteran who had fought at Titan Station, looked up from her analysis console with the expression of someone who had just solved a puzzle and discovered that the answer was worse than the problem. "They're not from this galaxy," she said quietly, her words falling into the command center like stones into still water. "The energy signatures, the weapon patterns, the way they're consuming Ravager technology, it's all wrong. This isn't how any known species fights." High Counselor Alexei moved to the display, his multifaceted eyes studying the sensor data with the analytical precision that had made the Zalathi such gifted engineers. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics of dawning comprehension and absolute terror. "They're not consuming the technology," he said slowly. "They're converting it. Look at the molecular patterns. The Ravager ships aren't being destroyed, they're being transformed into something else." The implications hit the room like a physical blow. The Ravagers had been terrifying because they assimilated conquered species, but they had still been recognizably biological. This new enemy was something far worse, a force that could convert matter itself into weapons of war. "Permission to dock granted," Vasquez said finally, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had made the decision to embrace the devil she knew in order to fight the one she didn't. "But I want full biohazard protocols, whatever did this to them. I don't want it spreading to our ships." The Ravager vessel that limped into the station's docking bay was a nightmare of partially converted technology, its hull writhed with metallic growths that pulsed with an alien rhythm, and its organic components screamed in harmonics that registered on sensors as pure agony. The creature that emerged from its depths was barely recognizable as the same species that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. Its biomechanical form was riddled with foreign technology, silvery threads that moved with independent purpose, weaving through its organic components like parasites. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of dying stars filtered through the screams of conquered worlds. "Human warriors," it managed, its multiple eyes focusing on Vasquez with difficulty. You understand war. You understand survival." "They do not. They only understand conversion." "Who are they?" Vasquez asked, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm, despite knowing it would be useless against something that had defeated the Ravagers. "The Convergence," the creature replied, its form shuddering as the foreign technology within it pulsed with malevolent life. "They came from beyond, from the space between galaxies. They do not conquer, they do not harvest, they, perfect. The word hung in the air like a curse, and Vasquez felt the cold certainty of someone who had just realized that everything she thought she knew about warfare was about to become obsolete. The Ravagers had been predators, but predators could be fought, could be defeated, could be reasoned with on some level. This convergence was something else entirely. How do we fight them? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. You cannot, the Ravager replied, its voice carrying the harmonics of absolute despair. They are inevitable. They convert everything they touch, matter, energy, consciousness, all become part of the perfect form. We tried to flee, but they follow. Always they follow. The creature's form convulsed, and Vasquez could see the silver threads spreading through its body like a cancer. They are already here, it whispered, in the outer systems, converting, perfecting. Soon they will come for this place, and all your preparations will be irrelevant. The communications console erupted with activity as long-range sensors detected the first signs of the approaching threat. They appeared on the display as geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, formations that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the three-dimensional space they occupied. Each ship was a perfect crystalline structure that reflected no light, absorbed no energy, and radiated a cold malevolence that made every organic being in the command center shiver. With instinctive terror, fleet strength, Vasquez asked, though she knew that conventional metrics would be meaningless against an enemy like this. Impossible to determine, reported the sensor officer, his voice tight with frustration. They're not reading as separate vessels. It's like they're all part of the same organism. The entire fleet is one entity. Ambassador Keffer stepped forward, his crystalline form flickering with the desperate hope of a diplomat who still believed that any conflict could be resolved through negotiation. Perhaps we can communicate with them, establish dialogue, find some common ground. The Ravager creature turned its multiple eyes toward the syndicate representative, and for a moment, its expression held something that might have been pity. They communicated with us. It said slowly, they showed us their purpose, perfection, unity, the elimination of all inefficiency, all individuality, all chaos. It gestured weakly toward the tactical display, where the Convergence fleet continued its inexorable advance. They see the galaxy as flawed, imperfect, full of competing interests, conflicting goals, unnecessary diversity. They come to fix these problems, to make everything perfect. Vasquez felt the cold certainty of someone who had spent her life fighting totalitarian regimes and recognized the ultimate expression of that impulse. The Convergence wasn't just an enemy, it was the antithesis of everything that made life worth living. It was order without freedom, unity without choice, perfection without humanity. How long do we have? She asked. They will reach the inner systems within 48 hours. The creature replied, they do not need to rest, do not need to resupply. They are efficient. The command center fell silent as the full weight of the situation settled over them. The Syndicate's careful balance of power, the Zalathi's newfound martial prowess, the Ravager's terrifying efficiency, all of it was about to become irrelevant in the face of an enemy that sought to eliminate the very concept of conflict by eliminating the possibility of choice. Major, High Counselor Alexei said quietly, his voice carrying harmonics of desperate hope. You said you came here to teach us to save ourselves. How do we save ourselves from something that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with, cannot be defeated? Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, her augmented hand tracing patterns on the tactical display as she considered the question. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had spent her life finding solutions to impossible problems. We don't save ourselves, she said finally. We save each other. She turned to face the assembled representatives of 3 different species, each one facing extinction in their own way. The Convergence thinks they understand perfection, but they've made one critical error. They assume that efficiency is the same thing as effectiveness. They've never encountered a species that turned inefficiency into an art form. Her smile was sharp as a blade. They've never fought humans. The plan that emerged over the next 6 hours was insane in its scope and terrifying in its implications. It required the complete integration of human military doctrine with Zalathi engineering. precision, and syndicate logistical capabilities. It meant turning the entire galaxy into a weapon, using the diversity that the Convergence saw as weakness as the foundation of their defense. But most importantly, it required a fundamental shift in how the galaxy thought about war itself. The Convergence converts everything they touch, Vasquez explained to the assembled fleet commanders who had gathered from across the system. They're expecting us to fight them directly, to meet their fleets in open battle where they can convert our ships and turn our own weapons against us. She gestured to the tactical display, where the projected course of the Convergence fleet painted a path of inevitable destruction across the galaxy. So we're not going to fight them. We're going to teach them. The strategy was quintessentially human in its audacity. Instead of meeting the Convergence in open battle, the Allied forces would scatter across the galaxy, using the trade routes and communication networks that the Syndicate had spent millennia building to stay one step ahead of the enemy. They would hit and run, strike and fade, using the very inefficiency that the Convergence despised as their greatest weapon. But the real genius of the plan lay in its ultimate goal. The humans weren't trying to defeat the Convergence, they were trying to change them. Every engagement would be designed to introduce chaos into the enemy's perfect order, to force them to adapt, to evolve, to become something other than what they were. The Convergence seeks perfection, Vasquez explained to the dying Ravager creature as medical teams work to stabilize its failing systems. But perfection is a static state. It cannot grow, cannot change, cannot adapt. The moment we force them to become something they weren't before, we've already won. The creature's multiple eyes focused on her with something that might have been respect. You would corrupt them, turn them into something like us? We would teach them to be imperfect, Vasquez replied, to be chaotic, to be alive. The final twist came as the Convergence fleet reached the outer edges of the system, their geometric formations beginning to deploy in the perfect mathematical patterns that had conquered a dozen galaxies. The Allied forces scattered as planned, their ships disappearing into the void like seeds carried by the wind. But they left behind something the Convergence had never encountered before, a gift. It was a simple radio transmission, broadcast on all frequencies in the mathematical harmonics that served as the galaxy's universal language. But the message it carried was pure chaos, the complete cultural and military history of three species who had learned to turn their differences into strength. The effect on the Convergence fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Their perfect unity shattered as they tried to process the concept of controlled chaos, their geometric formations dissolving into random patterns as they struggled to understand how imperfection could be a strength. For the first time in their existence, the Convergence began to change. All units, Vasquez broadcast to the scattered fleet, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just achieved the impossible. The galaxy is about to learn what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object that refuses to be moved. The real war was just beginning. But for the first time since the Convergence had emerged from the void between galaxies, the outcome was no longer certain. The galaxy had learned to fight not just with weapons, but with the very chaos that made life worth living. And in the depths of space, the first converted Convergence ship began broadcasting a signal that would change everything. A request for asylum, transmitted in the broken harmonics of a machine that had just learned to dream. The galaxy burned, as the title had promised, but it burned with the fire of transformation rather than destruction. The warriors Earth had sent to protect the innocent had become the catalyst for the greatest change in galactic history. The day the universe learned that imperfection was not a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated. In the end, they had saved the galaxy not by defeating its enemies, but by teaching them to become something better than what they were. It was the most human victory of all, messy, chaotic, imperfect, and absolutely unstoppable.